This pandemic, as you know, there's a worldwide plague, and it's probably should have challenged us to really kind of focus on what's happening in our world today. We wonder when this plague will end. We wonder when this time when we can get back to work, when we can even get back to worrying about the impact of, we're trying to still figure out, right, the impact of this upon our personal economies, our national economies, our mental psyche, our personal and national psyches. We consider these things as we learn about how many people's lives around the world have also been impacted, right? It's not just been our local communities. This has been something well beyond that. And we watch the chilling mortality rates climb, and we try to understand these things. We try to put it in our hearts and our minds to reach maybe beyond a little bit of these mortal aspects and look at some other lessons in life, maybe some spiritual lessons. Well, I'm going to start off with some basics. What is a virus? Our virus is alive. We know from the Bible that life is in the nefesh kaya, the breath of life, right? For humans, this is the 8th day after fertilization and implantation, when we receive oxygen and life can begin. But for other forms of life, for other organisms on the planet, this is not quite the same. Oxygen is usually a requirement. So we have to look at a virus. A virus is actually a really interesting kind of ingenious structure. It is consistently a bunch of proteins. It has a unique coat of proteins. As you see, it's an outer layer, has an outer capsid to it, and it has a core of DNA or RNA, the viral genome. They're inert. That means they just sit there as an innate crystal, perhaps, or as a mineral. They're unable to reproduce energy. They're unable to multiply by themselves. They're unable to grow by themselves and become something different until they come in contact with a living cell. If their outer protein shell, that capsid layer that you see in the diagram there, is able to recognize through its specific receptors something specific, like in another cell, in a very exact and specific way, that can then begin to change that cell. It's like a key that has to fit exactly into a unique lock in order to unlock the beginning of a process. The viral DNA or RNA, depending on the type of viruses, and viruses are broken up into different categories. DNA viruses have 2 strands of DNA inside of it. They have a double helix. A viral RNA, it has RNA as its genome. It's just a single strand of DNA in there wound up, and there's different types there. But once inside, the viral DNA will then hijack this molecular mechanics the molecular machinery that we have inside of our cells, and will begin to reproduce. And it will go through its process, taking over the cell's own natural processes, effectively turning the cell into a reproduction factory. It co-opts it and at a massive level, and within a short time, the cell's filled with more viruses, and then it bursts, releasing thousands of more viruses to go off and do their thing. Now, there are millions and millions of types of different viruses. You can pick up books, and you can look at pictures of electron microscopy and things like that. Each of them have a very specific and unique purpose. Each of them attach to a specific type of cell, whether that be human cell or an animal cell or a plant cell or bacteria. So viruses are everywhere. Now there's one actually interesting type of virus called a retrovirus. You may have heard of retroviruses before. These are types of viruses that actually go in with their RNA, flip their RNA back into DNA, integrate into the host genome, and then express their viral proteins. That's the HIV virus. You've heard of this. But that process occurs in other viruses as well, where it integrates. And actually, they estimate about 8% of our DNA in our cells is actually from viral origins. So the term virus itself is a Latin contraction. It means, in a couple different things, it comes from the term the semen of a man. It also comes from the term a venom of snake. It's a word for poison. For thousands of years, the term has referred to any substance that could spread a disease. It wasn't until the 1800s that we realized there are bacteria even in existence, and they're 1/100th the size of a human cell. And then it wasn't until the 1930s that we learned that there are viruses out there, and they're 100th the size of a bacteria. So you can think how small these are. These viral particles, like I mentioned, they're 95% protein and about 5% of this nucleic acid. Some of them do have some lipids and lipid layers and things like that, or membranes around them, and some don't. And like I said, they infect just about everything. So viruses also share patterns with non-living things. They can't grow by themselves. They can't metabolize. They have no metabolism in them. They don't have a mitochondria, no energy production capability. They're unable to perform even the basic tasks that a bacteria, and a bacteria is one of the simplest form of life that we understand. Viruses altogether, they take up actually a large part of the biomass on the Earth. There's been estimates, but if you look in the oceans and you take a bucket of fresh, clean seawater, what's in it? Well, you got seawater, you got bacteria, you got algae, phytoplankton, spores, and embryos of various fish life and things like that. But every liter of cell water is estimated to contain 100 billion viruses. So just a few. Most of these viruses actually are forms of bacteriophages. That's a type of virus, and it attacks bacteria specifically. And there's been some studies or some calculations saying that perhaps 30% of the ocean's bacteria every day are killed by bacteriophages. So this process then kills the bacteria, releases their nutrients back into the sea, and allows other organisms to feed on them. So viruses are everywhere. We can't get away from them. They're part of the circle of life, right? They're part of this balance that has been created on this earth, this balance of life. So when a virus is present, it invades or infects its host. It kills and causes some sort of reaction in that host. That host then has some sort of inflammatory reaction or death or something like that occurs. Ultimately, the virus never really takes the best interests of its host into mind. It doesn't take in the best regards for its host. In the end, the virus wins. The host dies for the most part. Now, there's exceptions to all these rules, and when you go into biology and nuance it out, you're going to break it up. There are also spiritual viruses that surround and attack us from every direction. How we respond to them, how we let them into our lives, and how we live with their effects has great meaning to our life. Ultimately, when you break down these parts of a virus and what a virus is, we kind of have to break down them to kind of a fundamental level. Let's step back a little bit and think about some of the basics of genetics, since that is one of my favorite topics, being a geneticist. So the central dogma of genetics is actually, we have our DNA, right? We have about 20,000 genes in all of our cells. Of those 20,000 genes, they produce proteins. So when the gene is transcribed or transcription, that occurs, it makes an mRNA molecule. That mRNA molecule is then translated by something called a ribosome in our cells. And that is translated into a protein. So DNA makes RNA, makes protein. That protein can be a structural part of our cells. That protein can be an enzyme or something has to do something, has some sort of catalytic or purpose or action, if you want to think about it in that way. A virus is essentially doing the same thing our gene's doing. Our gene is a message that says to ultimately form some sort of action as a protein. A virus interrupts this cycle, right? It is a message itself. It is a piece of DNA from the virus, or it's a piece of RNA from the virus, and it's bringing in a different message than the message that's already within our cells. Here's a review, kind of a little bit of the viral life cycle, right? If you go through the steps, the virus must attach to a receptor on the cell. It has to enter into the cell, and then it has to be released, and that viral DNA or the RNA has to be released into the cell, and it goes into the nucleus, or in this case, that RNA in this little diagram will go to the ribosomes and will be translated into a protein. So it's making the viral proteins. The viral proteins will then assemble into some sort of new virus, making clones of the original copy. And then as those viruses accumulate within the cells, they're released outside of the cell. Often that happens by just the cell bursting open and releasing all these out. Sometimes it's a little bit more controlled, but sometimes not. So viruses attach. We try to fight the effects of these viruses. These are influences attacking us from the outside. Just as the outer viral shell has special proteins or receptors that are designed to recognize the specific proteins of the specific cell that it's designed to attack, so too messages are designed to attack and influence our lives in some specific targeted way, or in some part of our mind or body or our spirit. A virus can only attach in a certain specific message. It can only attach with a specific spot. But spiritual viruses can have multiple effects in our lives. Incoming messages may be good. They may bring us immediate good tidings, good news. They may bring us things that encourage us and build us up. They may make us pause a minute and go, was that a good or bad message? We have to stop and think about it. Or they may just specifically challenge us, right? They may force us to distinguish between good and bad. We have to decide if we're going to let that evil message integrate into our cell, if we're going to let it in. Are we going to let it take over our lives and into our inner machinery, injuring, wounding, or even destroying us? Targeted viral news will corrupt our spirit and allow ourselves to allow the evil messages to grow within us, even then infecting others, and perhaps in changing our minds and hearts and those of those around us. Genesis 3, verse 1. You know this story. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord had made. And he said to the woman, God has indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden. And the woman said to the Spirit, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Then the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. Eve let the virus in. So number 2, the virus enters. So when the virus knows it's hit its target, it enters the cell. Now sometimes this is a complex machinery of how it happens, but as it enters the cell, it will begin to grow. It will begin to perform its actions it is designed to take place in. Now we may recognize this quickly as a bad virus. Our body may try to set up defenses to shrug this off, but if it's already entered, it's already going to start having an effect. The fruit appeared pleasant to the eyes, did it not? We may give in to the influences of the powers of this world, right? Ephesians 2 and verse 3, to the spirit of disobedience and the spirit of lust and desire and wrath. Ephesians 2 and verse 1, and he who made alive, who were dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience, among whom we are all once conducted ourselves in the lusts of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of our flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, just as the others. Do we allow these viruses in? Do we allow them to come into our lives and take over? What are the receptors that we're showing that are allowing these viral messages to grab hold in our life? Are these things going to change our lives for good or not? Now, there's a term in the study of virology called the viral load. You may have heard that in the past 10 months because it's been bantered about quite a bit. This is a concept that a certain amount of viruses have to actually successfully infect a host organism in order to cause disease. So if it's just a few viruses attaching or a few viruses hitting the host, you may be able to fight it off. Maybe that message has no effect. Or maybe it overwhelms the host. That's actually the idea behind these things, right? These masks that we wear. We're trying to alter the viral load that we're spreading and that we're receiving. So as we think about this on a spiritual level, if the viral load is too much for our defenses, if our defenses are being overwhelmed, we fall into line, succumbing to the infection and allowing to proceed. We can't allow our defenses to become tired, worn, and weary. Maybe we need to wash our viral mask every now and then, or our spiritual mask. We can't let our defenses become. Galatians 6 and verse 9, do not let us be weary in well-doing. In due season we shall reap if we faint not. 2 Thessalonians 3:13, But ye, brethren, be not weary in well-doing. The next step in viral replication, if we flip over here to this, continuing on our process, is viral DNA or RNA replication. Here's where the viral DNA will provide a template. It's a new set of instructions for something that is foreign to our cells, right? This is a foreign to our own selves. These instructions will just seem to sneak in. They will not destroy our cells initially. They just the viruses kind of come on in, they infect, and the DNA is released. That DNA or the RNA of the virus is then read by our ribosomes. Our ribosomes are the organs and the parts of our cells that actually make the proteins that we talked about earlier. Our ribosomes don't know the difference. They're just machines. They just do what they're told. RNA comes, we make protein. That's what they do, just in, out, in, out. So they don't know when there's a viral message in there. They just put out the protein. That's all they're supposed to do. So they do their job. They don't know to resist it. They have no way to knowing. These messages don't seem deceitful to them. They may just slip past our defenses, just as lies designed to appear like the truth. Proverbs 12 and verse 17. He who speaks truth declares righteousness, but a false witness deceit. There is one who speaks like the piercings of a sword, but the tongue of the wise promotes health. The truthful lips shall be established forever, but a lying tongue but is for a moment. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but counselors of peace have joy. 3 John 1 and verse 11. Beloved, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. He who does good is of God, but he who does evil is not seen God. Our ribosomes will just transcribe and replicate the viral DNA. They'll make these proteins. Or not replicate the DNA, they will transcribe and express the enzymes from the viral DNA. And they will start generating more and more of these viral proteins. As these viral proteins accumulate, they will start forming the new replicated viruses. They will start self-forming in that way. And probably will actually use other parts of our cells to actually, in other organs within our cells, organelles, to begin to assemble those proteins together. And they start accumulating. They accumulate within our cells and gradually grow. Again, our cells don't know better. They're just going along and doing what they know to do. We take protein, we're going to make these structures. We don't know what they mean. They're just part of this process. They have no idea what they're doing. Romans 7, verse 15. As Paul said, for what I am doing, I do not understand. For what I will to do, I do not practice. For what I hate to do, that I do. If then I do what I not do, I agree with the law that is good. But now it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. For I know that in me, that is my flesh, nothing good dwells, but is willed to present me. But how to perform what is good I do not find. For the good that I will do, I do not do. And the evil that I will not do, that I practice. But if I do what I will not do, it is no longer I who do it, but sin who dwells in me. Paul knew what he wanted to do, right? He had a will to do the right thing, but there's this automatic part of him that just went along with it, right? Old habits. How often do we fall into this thinking? Knowing that there's something else within us that's limiting our ability to follow God's ways. We have one set of instructions in our mind, perhaps in our hearts, and another set of instructions working seemingly without our input, without our willing to do them, perhaps even working against those things which we need to do, which will show us how to follow God's ways better. The fifth step is viral reproduction and spread. Slowly, but surely, our cells will become overloaded with these new viral proteins as they are produced in large quantities. And as those viral proteins are assembled into new complete viruses, those newly replicated viruses accumulate, and the cell then swells and bursts. That cell dies, and then this happens to another cell. And the organ where that cell is begins to suffer, maybe not functioning as well. Hepatitis sets in the liver, or cardiomyopathy in the heart, and the heart not working quite as well as it should have been. The disease begins to spread, and as these newly replicated viruses continue to spread, reproduce, and spread from cell to cell to cell, Just as we, when we don't resist evil, when we allow evil thoughts and messages to take over our lives, we're unable to live the true, healthy, righteous life that we're called to. We give in to the sins that we've created from listening and following these viral messages. Our lives begin to suffer emotionally, physically, socially, and spiritually. These spiritual viral messages will cause us to suffer sin. Sin leads to death, Romans 6:23. Effects of the products of our dead actions will create a surrounding climate of fear and illness, just as our cells, when that have been reproducing these cells, lead our bodies actually to try to defend themselves. This is the inflammatory response. These cells are dying and bursting open, and there are inflammatory markers present, and our body is attacking those things. That is the inflammatory reaction. That reaction is our body's normal cellular response to those foreign viral substances, but also to the cell death that's occurring. Yes, we struggle against these viral messages, just as our bodies and our flesh struggle every day. Ephesians 6 and verse 12, for we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. Verse 16, above all, take the shield of faith, which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. Our battles are against the spiritual principalities and the powers every day, against the wickedness of those spiritual messages, those viral messages that attack us. Let's go back and look at that story in Genesis 3. Genesis 3, 1 through 7, right? This is when Eve takes of the fruit of the tree of the good of knowledge of the good and evil. Get right there. So in verse 6, I ended last time. And so when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of the fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate. And then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they both knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. So Eve was infected by a spiritual virus. Now, the term virus is never actually used in the Bible, but snake actually works really well if you go start looking at serpents in the Bible. It's a message. She thought it was a good message. She let it in to her heart, her mind, her soul. And then she acted on that viral deception, right? She spread it. She replicated this lie, and she repeated it. Adam was infected by the same message, but not from the original virus, was he? He received a replicated virus from Eve. Her sin spread like an infection through our bodies to Adam. So ultimately, he received the same message, and it corrupted his heart, mind, and soul just as hers. What lies and viral messages are we spreading today? Are these messages in line with the truth of God? Are they based in fact, science? Are they based in the Bible? Or are they based on our own flight of fantasy? What misinformation are you spreading today? Do those messages do what is best for the other person? Do they point to Jesus Christ? Are we replicating lies? Are we following the fantasies of the internet bloggers that we read, or whatever that comes from, or from Instagram or Facebook or wherever that is, right? Or are we following something that has more regard for God's law? Revelation 12 and verse 15 is another serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he may cause her to be carried away by the flood. The serpent opened its mouth, and there was a flood of waters. And you think of these, this is a flood of torrent of waters that you can't stop. You can't resist. It's carrying you away, washing you away. I can kind of think of that happening in the past few months, can't you? That force, that volume of deception that's coming towards us, we're beginning to get a sense of that coming, right? That tsunami is coming towards us. The inflammation from our destroyed cells creates a vicious cycle of increasing inflammation that spreads across our cells, across our organs, spreads to different organs, and then throughout our whole body. When that inflammation hits our bloodstream and it's infecting, that's what we call sepsis. Sepsis affects the whole body, and then systemically, everything has to be dealt with. You have to go back to the original infection, but you also got to take care of the inflammation that's spread because of it. So when a spiritual virus is successfully attacked, entered, and overtaken us, and we're suffering spiritually, our normal desired hopes to follow God are derailed because of this original message, right? We commit the actions of sin. These sins lead to death, and we know what those wages are. These are the wages. The sin will continue to grow and fester. The viral message will have its effect and infect our whole body, as an addict is overcome by the addiction. As an infected toe can lead to sepsis throughout the whole body. Or actually, as some cancerous cells are actually transformed originally by a virus that replicates and then turns that cell into a cancerous form that then metastasizes throughout the whole body. That's another interesting correlation there, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that due to time. When one part of the body suffers, the whole will suffer. 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 26. There's a story in Numbers 21. This is the story of the serpents in Israel. Again, going back to these serpents, right? Numbers 21 and verse 4. I'm just going to read a little chunk here. Then they journeyed from Mount Hor by the way of the Red Sea to go around the land of Edom. And the soul of the people, this is the people of Israel, became very discouraged in the way. So this is Israel as they've crossed the Red Sea. They're now in the desert. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? For there is no food and no water, for our soul loathes this worthless bread. That's manna. It's worthless, right? So the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people, and they bit the people, and many of the people of Israel died. Therefore the people came to Moses and said, We have sinned, for we have spoken against the Lord and against you. Pray to the Lord, and he will take the serpents from us. So Moses prayed for the people, and the Lord said to Moses, Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole, and it should be that everyone who is bitten, when he looks at it, shall live. And so Moses made a bronze serpent and put it on a pole, and so it was. If a certain serpent had bitten anyone, when he looked upon the bronze serpent, he lived. So there was clearly some disgruntlement going around in Israel, right? They had their rumors, their gossip, their innuendo. They were clearly not happy, even though they had just crossed through the Red Sea and seen one of the greatest miracles of all time. Yet, manna wasn't good enough. Something infected them, right? It went around and bit them on the heel, poisoned them. Fiery serpents were poisonous. And poison is a lie. It's a virus. And they had to get rid of it. What did they have to do to get rid of it? They had to turn back to God. John 3 in verse 14 is the other part of this story, right? And as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. So they have to look upon Jesus Christ and his sacrifice for us. If you can't look upon Christ, you're not going to survive the viral messages. You're not going to survive any infection that's coming for you. It's also kind of interesting, as a side note, the bronze serpent pole with the serpent and snake around it, right? That's the origin of the medical symbol that we see today, right? So medicine kind of kicks into there a little bit. I always find that a fascinating story. Psalms 119 and 133. Direct my steps by your word, and let no iniquity have dominion over me. Redeem me from the oppression of man, that I may keep your precepts. We try maybe to find a safe place. Let's find a way so we can escape these viruses. Let's live in a bubble, right? Let's create a bubble around us so we're protected from this, not let anything in. Is that a biblical concept? Should we strive to create a place where we can teach our kids in the ways of God and protect them from the harms and the influences of this world? Yes, we should try to do that. But does this really protect them? Are they stronger working in isolation? Right? Some viruses are there to teach you lessons. God's put these messages there sometimes for us to learn, to grow. 8% of our DNA today is virus, or was virus at some point in time. So we're different for a reason. We've changed from a reason. We can't escape these spiritual viruses. They're going to affect us, but we have to be able to build our defenses for them. We have to vaccinate ourselves ahead of time, honestly. You have to prepare yourself in the Word of God. The idea of a bubble, we try to do that to protect the ones we love, and it's a great thought, but it really is just a fantasy, right, in this world. This world is full of billions, trillions of viruses, and we have to be ready. The virus is a curious part of life. The word virus, as we mentioned, comes from the word for poison. It's certainly a distinctive label for something so intricate and complex. This poison is designed to take life. A virus will take the life of its host. Again, there's exceptions to these things, but it will take the life of its host. That's what it's supposed to do. So too, we have to be aware and watching for these poisonous viruses in our lives. We have to be building up our defenses, working on our immune system, hitting our knees, praying, fasting. We have to be able to discern and search the scriptures daily, right, as the Bereans did. We have to learn to recognize the viral lies that exist as we compare these with God's word. Do these viral influences in our lives build us up? Will they make us stronger? Maybe make us more wary, make us more aware? Are these lies, these messages, designed to do what is best for the other person? That is the meaning of ahava in Hebrew, or agape in Greek. Do they build up righteousness, or do they lead to death from the works of the flesh? Spiritual viruses surround and attack us from every direction, and how we respond to them, let them into our lives, how we let them replicate and grow and reproduce in ourselves, has great meaning for each of our lives. The spiritual virus will attach to our life. It will target us. The spiritual virus will enter our life and release its message and allow its DNA to be read. This viral DNA will then use parts of ourselves that we didn't even know that we can stop, to create new viral messages, to create new replicated viruses. These new viruses will then replicate and overwhelm our cells if we're not aware of them, until that cell bursts and dies. And that cell will die if it's been infected. Maybe your own body will have to take it out and get rid of that one cell and prevent it from attacking other cells, prevent it from attacking organs and taking down the whole body. That virus will have a change on the body. It's supposed to. It's designed to. It could and often may kill the body if our defenses are not ready for it, unless we recognize these messages in the first place. What viral spiritual messages are you fighting today? What spiritual viruses did you think of or soon come across your steps this morning? What are you allowing to your life? What are your receptors? Where are you going, yeah, I'm okay with that? Is that an in for that virus? And what messages are you replicating? There's a lot of crazy stuff out there nowadays, and there's a lot of misinformation. Psalm 119 and 132. Look upon me and be merciful to me, as your custom is toward those who love your name. Direct my steps by your word, and let no iniquity have dominion over me. Redeem me from the oppression of man, that I may keep your precepts. Make your face shine upon your servant, and teach me your statutes.